we can get started. I so how it will work, my newest colleague, Jess Edwards, and I have the great opportunity to do like a fireside chat with Stacey this afternoon. Jess will come in with some questions as well, and Jess, you can introduce yourself when you get the chance to speak. But thank you, Stacey. So
Ooh,
let's dive right in. All right, sound
great.
good? Awesome, awesome. Okay. So, Stacey, I think one of the major challenges that we are seeing, or that was named in the poll, is funding and sustainability. And so you've worked with workforce initiatives at the local, state, national level. When you look across regions today, what are we still getting wrong or thinking too narrowly about when it comes to workforce development, and specifically with the maintaining sustainable funding for these,
These
for,
definitions.
yeah.
Sure. And I think the poll was really indicative of this topic in general because everyone's needs do vary a little bit. And I think it depends a lot on funding. If you were lucky enough to be part of a consortium that received significant or long funding, like something like the engine, which theoretically is going to be funded for 10 years, your needs tend to shift a little bit than those that don't receive that funding, but have the same kind of core need at the bottom. What I think we tend to get wrong is we look at it from the perspective of a program versus a pathway, or an individual entity versus a system. So it's one thing to be able to fund a program to take off, to get cheeks and seats and to get people kind of learning something new. But it's a different conversation when we're talking about sustaining that long term and what's necessary to be involved from the beginning in order to sustain something with or without that additional funding coming your way.
Yeah, thank you, Stacey. That's an excellent point. So how can we kind of connect workforce and economic development strategies across, all the broad sectors that are involved?
Yeah, and I think you have to really know what it is that you're going for and know the people that need to be at the part of that, to be part of your North Star, your shared mission. So I'm going to use sort of an example here and something that I've worked on. I knew, and we wanted to make a dent in trades training and placement into these different, relatively high-tech technician roles here in New York State. We really needed to be able to prepare workforce here for the semiconductor industry. There's a lot going on the energy side. And right now, we had just a lot of a very, very robust university system. We have a statewide BOCES system, which is a CTE system. We have, more money paid per student in education than any other state. We've got, all of these things, right? But it wasn't, why wasn't this working? It should, theoretically be working. And the truth is, it was all very siloed. Even when we looked at the CTEs, different CTE centers that we have, training facility centers that we have throughout the state, they very much functioned independently. So they didn't share even the same LMS systems. There's no shared requirement of reporting or metrics or anything like this. So when funding came in the door and you're funding a program, you're funding that one program in a silo, and then you're starting fresh. You're starting over every time. So, the ramp up of any funding that comes in, so much of it is spent in putting a new team together, getting that new team ready, and then launching that program instead of taking a step back and looking at what we already have and where could we invest that money in partners that we already have doing the work, but just better connect those partners into the same system. And it sounds really simple, but it is one of the biggest misses of all the projects I work on across the entire country. It's great to say we need to have K-12 at the table, but what does that really mean? Have you been in their facilities? Do you really know what they have access to? What are the limitations to the training in terms of what they're allowed to do for job placement? Are you set up for paid internships and all these different things that you really have to know for yourself when you're putting these programs together? And the same could be said about community college. And then the other thing that is a miss far, far too often is your industry voice at the table. So not industry giving you a letter or, pulling a report that can show like we have X amount of jobs needs in these different categories. Excuse me, but you really have to have a committed industry partner that's going to be there with you every step of the way, that will pilot these different, kind of solutions that you're putting forward with you and help to realize what it is your mission is saying you're going to accomplish. So will they really, pay and have internships? Will they hire people at the end of these programs and then communicate back to you what's working and what doesn't, and have that kind of a relationship that is give or take. So it's not where you're so afraid if, it's not working the first time, you can't go back and make changes the second time. So, starting well in advance of when you apply, plan to apply for funding is so important, so that you have all of this sort, starting to work, and you have some sort of a joint mechanism of collecting data, and you're doing this regularly, so that when it comes, time to apply for significant funding, you're not trying to create this, you're just telling the story of what you're already doing. And I think that, I know, both as a reviewer of these grants and as someone has written them, it comes across in the narrative, and definitely comes across in your year one, year two successes.
And one follow-up on that is, you mentioned the silos. How can an organization or a department recognize they are in a silo? Because I think it's hard to recognize you. We all think we're great partners and we're great coworkers, but how could these partners recognize, oh, I'm not collaborating in the best way I can?
Yeah, I think, you can ask yourself if you do the majority of your job from your office or from your own, facility, and you haven't been in the facilities of your partners, that's something that you personally can overcome. And, and I've been guilty of that in the past. I know when we were working on funding with Jobs for the Future, we we're telling this incredible story about climate resiliency and about jobs and all of our different partners. But what I did learn was a lot of our partners themselves had never been in each other's facilities. They didn't, they could talk about it, but they couldn't talk about it from a place of, personal experience. So I ended up getting a van and we jumped in a car and we spent 3 days actually doing that and just going to each other's locations and facilities and just looking and seeing and talking to people on their own ground, and getting an idea for ourselves about, what worked and what didn't work. And it just sparked this great sort of collaboration that which ended up kind of leading to a large portion of the success that I've had here in New York in the last couple of years. But, we took for granted that these folks had already done that, but they hadn't, right? And there was actually no one at the university that I was working with at the time that had been in any of these facilities. So we know about them, they report about them, but they've never seen them themselves. And then when we have opportunities to bring partners in, especially if it's industry partners or national philanthropy, I stopped doing it at my own facility because everybody had been there, right? They know what the university is, but we would host these at our partner facilities and let them have a chance to see for themselves, all of these different attributes and assets that we have. That was a game changer as well, because you never know what's going to sort of spark that light in the person that happens to be there. For me, it happened to be someone that leads Aries Foundation, and they just really fell in love with this one particular thing they saw, and that changed the whole sort of direction when we talk about sustainability of the program. But it was like you have to kind of get out of your comfort zone and be willing to do that. And not every job allows you the flexibility to do that. So it's hard too. I think we all work so much, especially since COVID. I think some of us have yet to take a day off since COVID, but yet it has to be sort of baked into those job roles that you have that requirement, that time, that protected time to be able to work together. And sometimes that does definitely require, being in different places at different times. For the system that I was talking about with our Board of Education, our CTE system, they did not have that flexibility. That wasn't built into what their job performance entailed. That has all changed since we started doing this. We were able to achieve real systems and policy change because we could prove the impact, and the impact has just been, phenomenal. Something I'll be most proud of, the rest of my life in terms of career, because we saw a 35% increase in participation at these centers. We saw a 169% increase in paid internships, and we saw a 150% increase in paid at a quality job rate, paid placements into these jobs at graduation. And that was while we were piloting this program. And since then, of course, it's grown. But, that did start with looking at it that holistically to include everything from policy to practice to, to kind of doing what it takes to get those permissions in place first, because you can't really work backwards, once you are already obligated to a timeline.
Yeah, you can't work backward, which actually brings me to the question of like who needs to be at the table from the very beginning. Wh who would you suggest is like the essential ones?
What I say, everybody has a different idea of what they want to apply for funding. I think if we look at tech hubs and we look at the EDA's Build Back Better, great examples of that, all incredibly important work. Some of those programs had up to 112 partners, right? So they all are slightly different. But what I would say is get your core group, the people that you personally know that you would want to be involved, and pilot what you want to do. So almost do sort of like a theoretical version of that. Run through what your first year would look like and identify where those gaps are and who needs to be at the table. So if you know a component of the work that you're applying for is going to be, working with underserved, community members between 16 and 23, do you have somebody at that table that's actively doing that work and not in a very small quantity? So somebody that has the authority to make decisions, that has the authority to sign, the documents in which you would have to get signed to do the application you're talking about. Can they hire people? Can they, champion policy change if you need that? And if they're not that person, like if they are that person by name, but they're not that person by action, then it's absolutely okay to bring more people in. There's nothing that says you can only have that one person. And anyone that's going to do like large scale place-based economic development, they 100% have to be willing for their, and really believe that their mission is aligned to something much bigger and much greater than their one organization or entity. So they should be totally comfortable working with multiple people. And then for me, when there were areas that, okay, we did that, we've got a group of 12 people and, we got even industry at the door and, we're learning, but there's some things we just don't really understand very well. How do we, for me, it was like, I wanted to make sure I could survey youth and there was a lot of legality to that. So I reached out to Jobs for the Future, Families and Workers Fund, different, in this case, now we have Surge, which is an incredible asset. You don't have to be the expert, but just have access to those experts. And that's what something like this, Surge group can do for you, is to source someone that can come along and help you in your group to get the answers that you just might not know for sure. Or if something just feels like, I'm not totally comfortable with this, bring in experts that can help you with that. And they will take the time to work with you, which I don't know that enough people understand, because I did not until I was fortunate enough to be in that group. And I can tell you, even from redlining my grants in the early days to where we are today, and I'm hosting JFF here in 6 teams from across the country. It's a constant resource of learning what is most current and most impactful and needs to be evident in the work that you're doing. So if there is a gap, reach out to someone that can help you fill that gap. And don't ever be afraid of asking for that, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with not having everybody at the table. It's all about identifying the fact that, what you want to have there before you launch a program.
I love that you put it that way. You don't have to be the expert. You have to get access to the experts. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish with Surge under, the board's leadership and the team here. And I'm excited that we are providing that access. You are the expert and we're providing you as the expert as a resource to our audience here. So I wanted to shift a little bit more into competing for investment and building something that lasts, get more deeper into that. And I also wanted to remind the audience that you can ask questions on the chat and we'll try and sneak them in the discussion. So please put them in the chat. But Stacey, you've directed more than $500 million in workforce initiatives and contributed to successful Build Back Better, Tech Hubs, and NSF Engine efforts. So what would you say separates regions that successfully attract major investment from those that struggle in attracting investment?
In my experience with this, so, I think it's very much so understanding the program, working with that program sponsor, kind of leading up to that application. So, if you look at the difference between tech hubs and the Build Back Better, for instance, Build Back Better was very much about kind of setting this foundation for community investment. It was very holistic. It covered everything from workforce to wraparound services to, being able to create, like an avenue for startups. And it kind of was across the board, just how do we introduce this new topic that is essential and critical for the US for national security, but then also can build an economy in your area. So we were New Energy New York. So I was just focused on energy storage, batteries, that kind of thing. When Tech Hub came out, that was very much about, expanding with very industry focused lens. So then in order to be really successful for that, you're going to want to have a company that has either, they're reshoring to the US, they have massive, massive expansion plans. They're creating or doing something that is critical to national security, to US economic independence that no one else is really doing. So, in New York, that was semiconductor, and it was tied very closely with Micron coming in because that's massive. I have seen incredible applications go in for some of these programs where, and this is where it's really tricky because if you live in, most rural communities across the US, if you bring in an employer who's going to hire 450 people, or you're bringing in 3 employers that each hire 75, to 200 people, that impact is critical. And it's everything for your community because you probably just recently lost a company that did something similar. Really hard for that to then compete against someone like a Micron who's hiring 10,000 people in a community very similarly sized to you and your needs too. So, being able to, like, if you know that you have something that's so rock solid and it's going to make the impact, sometimes even though it doesn't feel like you should have to, in order to be competitive, it might be a matter of looking at who has a designation in your region, and your region could be multiple states, and seeing if you could sort of tag into one of those other applications. This way, you're still able to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. You're still highlighting the companies that are making all that difference for your region, but you're also now eligible and you're going to compete against those that you're competing with and that the reviewers are going to hold to that standard. And that's a challenge too. And that's another thing. And I'm going to go back, I'm going to plug Surge again, but that's another really big part of getting that help is in doing that matchmaking, knowing who's applying across the nation and saying, hey, there's something here to potentially partnering together with. That happens with me a lot. I was just pulled into an application from Deloitte. They're huge. They're a big consulting firm. They do a lot of national scale programs. And at the last minute, I was pulled in on something nuclear because I had a program that could really help somebody else, right? But they needed that one piece in order to be competitive. That is something that I would love to see happening more. We know Build to Scale is going to come out before long. We know Tech Hubs is going to come out again before long. As these big programs announce, working in advance to do that matchmaking, taking the time to see if, that is a really, like, does it actually make sense? Again, it might on paper, but could you all work together? Does this really meet your mission? Will you have the authority to make the decisions that you still need to make and yet accomplish what your goal is to accomplish? And, do you have the buy-in from your industry partners and the rest? If you could start working on that now, knowing that these other programs are going to announce in the next couple months, now is definitely the time to start doing that. And then if you ever do want help, I'm happy to jump on a call anytime. I might have to be after 5 p.m. It might have to be, but I do this and I do this for a reason because, without having that kind of support and being able to work together, you tend to see, money stay pretty monopolized in the same areas. And we know as a nation, we need that to change. And we know if we say, these programs are supposed to have a sustaining effect on low-income communities, but low-income communities haven't really changed, by definition in literally decades at times, we know we need to do a little bit different than what we've done before. And that takes working in advance to really prepare for these things. So I'm always happy to help if I can in any way with things like that. And there's a handful of people like me that will as well. And some of them probably have, much more experience even than I do, but I'm always happy to help make those connections so that people do feel like at least they have a competitive chance at these types of programs.
No, that's excellent to have you as a resource that's willing to collaborate with people trying to get some of this funding, which is exciting to hear as well. And as to hear more funding is coming through. And Jess asked the question on the chat. As these region coalition leads are starting to figure out their strategy, what is something they often get wrong about when pursuing workforce funding?
So one of the things that I see people get wrong a lot is when we always put high school age into the bucket of um, like exposure, right? We're going to introduce people to job concepts, things like this. Every state, except for I think one in the nation, has some sort of a statewide CTE program. So that's going to be your, Department of Labor approved trades programs. They're all different. They're not all, at the same caliber, but they all have facilities with incredible equipment, and they're all connected to industry because every trades program that is approved by the Department of Labor, it has to have an industry advisory committee that reviews that curriculum twice per year. So for mine, program, I'm in 5 centers. I have 900 companies that are a part of that. Out of that, I work with about 300 that are really there. But you have this built-in audience, right? So look at what you actually have and can accomplish, and don't worry so much about how you've defined it before. For my programs in those 5 centers, we place over 1,000 people a year into these quality jobs. So when I'm applying for funding, and let's say I want to do some more, something that's really complex, and I might have a very small amount of participants, like at the higher, collegiate level, something like this. If the topic includes one of the trades programs that I'm talking, like electrician, something like this, my numbers are always so strong. And I'm rock solid in how I collect my data. Happy to share that too. But I have those high numbers all the time, right? So this does make me more competitive. When we're applying as a coalition, we're always more competitive because we have those very large numbers. So I would find and really research and check out what your region is doing in the CTE space. Delaware is a great example. I want to say, don't quote me on the number, but I know it's over 20% of their workforce comes out of their CTE systems. And I think they just had the highest year of apprenticeships ever, right? So like every state has something like that. We don't talk about it a lot because I know in New York State, I'm the first ever to collect that data at the Department of Labor level. So this is the first time we're going to be able to even show what happens post placement. So it's never been part of the narrative, but that doesn't mean it isn't happening. So like really think about it and look at where the majority of people are being placed into jobs, where the equipment that you need to train exists right now, between community colleges and CT systems. Typically it's there, and then can you access that, and then can you bring in people that are able to train the trainer and experts in industry, and take what's already there and then make it stronger. I think that's so critical to the sustainability of the funding, because one, you have a built-in model that is already funded to run on a daily basis that you typically can tap into. And then it makes sense in a narrative to say this is upfront 1 year funding to kick this off, but then as a state model or whatever it might be, that sustainability is built into the funding model going forward. So that's the first thing I would look at. I think that is under far too often. We're starting to see a little bit of a swing with that. I think I push at the national level, so I'm on a couple different initiatives at a national level where we're really pushing that whole policy and that sort of like pay for performance and transparency with all of this, but it's still in practice heavily underutilized.
You mentioned job placement as a measurement, something to measure, right? What are some other things that regions should be measuring?
So for me, and and work that I've done in North Carolina, Wisconsin, a couple other states, Maryland, job placement is really important. It's not just placed into a job though. We really do look at the quality good job calculation for that region. So after going through these programs, are they placed into a job that meets that requirement? So do you make enough money to live where you are, with this job that you went through? Are you staying at that job? So looking at those retention rates at 3 months, 6 months, 9, and then I like to kind of look at it like a little after 2 years. And is there a pathway and avenue for progression within that job? So whether that's, your benefits are increasing or your pay is increasing, but is that genuine and is it actually happening? Another really important thing that I've started to take a lot more notice on is not so much do you have the funding and the support to start a program, but do you have a transparent way of looking and seeing that you have the funding and support to finish a program, right? So
Mhm.
we know we lose so many people in community college, for instance, between years 1 and 2. But I think, there's a lot of programs that'll allow you to go to school or go into a workforce program for free or next to free. But do you actually have the funding to stay there? What happens with housing costs come into play, or equipment costs come into play, and hardship and all these types of things? Can you see it through in a reasonable amount of time? And then is the job on the other end measuring that the jobs that we're saying are available to the community, to the population that we're saying we're specializing or we're training for? So we're seeing that a lot with security, for instance, right? Oh, we need a lot of jobs in cybersecurity, and there's a lot of roles open in entry level. Okay, but does this population qualify for those jobs? So, a lot, you have to be a US citizen, or, people's past can come into play. So just making sure that we're doing that legwork to take an extra step in defining that, because in many different cases, I've been pulled in when that just wasn't the case, and trying to fix it after the fact. So just, really look at that and be honest about it. There is enough of a job need across the country for everyone. That, every one of us could work on this every day, and we will still be busy on our weekends. Like, there's absolutely an opportunity for everyone. But not every opportunity belongs in every place. And it's
Mm.
okay to admit that. And it's okay to support someone else getting it if it's meant to be there. And they can achieve more by doing it there than you can where you are right now. Be willing to admit that, be willing to support that, because it all will come back around. But I think it's so important that we do that. Being the best grant writer, having the biggest amount of, match, that really shouldn't determine where these funds go. It
Yeah,
just, unfortunately, sometimes it does. So
sure. So thinking about sustainability and being transparent and really honest with how you're going to sustain from not just the start, but through to the end. When and how should you approach that with yourself, with your org, and with your partners?
yeah, I think transparency, again, honesty from the beginning, not feeling like you only have to tell your partners enough, but be honest and really have a group. If you are sitting around the table and you're not comfortable fully discussing what the next 4 years of this program is going to look like with those at the table, you should probably question whether the right people are at that table. Like, I mean, just, in all honesty, because you're going to need to rely on each other for that. I mean, I have never had a budget once ever in my life that hasn't changed multiple times, right? Before you get to the end. But you got to be able to kind of see that and know that and move forward with that. And for me, when I looked at, for instance, because CT was very important to me. I mean, I have a personal goal. I wanted to change public education. I wanted people to have exposure and experience. And the kids that I piloted with the first time, all 4 of them were dropping out of school, right? Every one of them were placed into a job, and one's at RIT now. It's crazy. And I get goosebumps still when I talk about it, because it means so much to me. But I looked at, for me, that was BOCES system, because of the way that they're reimbursed from every county that they're in. There was that built-in sustainability model. So I was comfortable saying, take a chance on me. This is why it can sustain. And then I did go and get a little bit of philanthropic funding that was extremely flexible to fill the gaps, because they will pop up, right? And there's been wonderful programs out there I've seen have to close over, as little as $13,000, because they just didn't have the flexibility in the schedule of, their budget schedule, and whomever was in charge of that wasn't willing to make any changes. And I've seen entire programs close because of that, right? And it was a program for immigrants, and it was just so sad to see. I wasn't in a situation to make a difference then, but I sure as heck learned how to, right, after seeing it. So, know all of it and take, really ownership. If you're PI or lead on one of these, understand what that means. I am not an academic, right? I work in a university now. I worked in a university coming into New York, but before that, I worked for the state, worked for industry, done all kinds of things, but I'm not an academic. And I think it's really important for academics, because universities are uniquely positioned to act as intermediaries for a lot of these types of programs, because we could set up accounts in something that's called at risk. And what that means is even if it takes 6 months to get your first reimbursement, we could advance that, because we typically have the funding to do so. We can do that kind of an evaluation of risk. And if it's, BOCES systems and hospital system, whoever your partners are, the risk is minimal. But we could get started right away. And then we have robust administration that could help to keep these grants and all the reporting and things like that done. So I'm an intermediary a lot for that.
Mm.
You'll hear that it's really hard to work with universities because the indirect rates are so high. They're not so high on everything, right? State funds, I can't charge indirects, period. I don't. Doesn't stop me from doing it. So you just have to kind of know how to kind of, talk that language and kind of make sure that it does make sense and you're not, offsetting too much of the funding. But we could take on risks others can't. That alone really helps to mitigate on the sustainability part. So, when I was working with our state, we know how excellent BOCES is, but we also know they are not staffed to manage these large scale grants. This is not what they do. They're educators. So how do we get the money to the people doing the work without overburdening them or using their budgets to pay for someone that may or may not come in and be able to do this? That's where someone like me can come in at a university, or identifying these sort of quality intermediaries that have a proven experience of doing it and are willing to do it for the shared mission at the end of the day. So, if you're in my office, you look around, you'll never see a plaque on my wall. You're not going to see my name. People that need to know who I am, they know who I am. And for me, I'm motivated by seeing new things built, by seeing people empowered, and, seeing real true systems change, seeing policy change. And, I guarantee you there's someone like me on this call right now in the audience, right? They're everywhere, but you don't always know how to connect with them. It's okay to say no to people who want to partner with you. And it's okay to fight for people that should be there that other people are telling you no. You know your programs, you know your mission. And it's okay to say no, because if you don't, there was a lot of problems with these federal programs. There were programs that completely shut down, and it was because the mission changed after the fact. And you had really large applicants go in saying they were going to do all this for the community. In the end, it became very interfocused on a particular university or entity, and the mission was lost. And so was that investment to everyone, right? So it's okay in the beginning to kind of question these things. I think it's so important to do so.
Yeah, and we're we're glad you're here, and as your passion and motivation is coming through very well. And I'm sure a lot of the people on the call have that same kind of drive to see policy change, systems change, for improvement and building more workforce strength and in the regions. Um, I want to see if anyone has a question they'd like to ask Stacey before I keep hogging up the airspace. Uh, just raise your hand, put it on chat, or let
Yeah.
me know.
I would love to hear of challenges or even like successes or things like this that you're seeing surface now that maybe weren't there in the past, or any changes in the last kind of year or 2 years that you've seen, especially if there are new or particular challenges or opportunities that we could all learn from, because I think we've got these little rare opportunities like this to really learn from what everybody's doing on the ground. So I know you did ask, but I'm kind of just doubling down on that. I would love
Yeah,
to hear from you and kind of hear from your perspective too.
and that goes to everyone. Jess.
I do have a question. So, Stacy, I know a common issue across communities is what you're talking about. There's a lot of hard work that goes on the front end, right? Of the workforce getting everyone together. They've identified a critical gap in training or employment. But another really big hurdle for once funding's in place, they have this awesome program, is the employer engagement. Where have you seen, not just employers endorsing a program, but really being active members and on their side following through? That's something I know is like kind of a common issue with programs and initiatives like this. So, have you seen any case studies or really great tips and tricks of how to keep the employer engaged?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think everyone's faced that. For me, when I was looking at because our Industry Ready New York is such a large scale program, and we knew we had industry in a sort of, a confined area, right? Like we knew we had access to them, but that doesn't mean that they were involved in, the equipment that we had or the material that we were teaching. And there were a lot of programs that the disconnect was obvious with industry still. Where we started to see some changes, we ended up hiring engineers that some of which were retiring out of companies, some of which were still active with the companies, but the companies provide them, and they became co-instructors. So they're teaching these courses as well, and that's building in a pipeline where the company knows, 100% that what they need their workforce to know is being taught. That was one thing. And I tested it too. So when I did this last expansion, I had each of the 5 centers just reach out, didn't give any direction at all, and just said, talk to 3 of your industry partners. I want to see what commitments they would give back. And out of those 14 companies, we ended up with 165 commitments to paid internships and 158 commitments to complete hire, plus all kinds of other stuff that they gave us. And they did follow through. But they're at the table. And I mean that. I mean, we're hosting our, industry meetings. I host meetings every 2 months where they rotate in person. We're out at their facilities. We're looking at their facilities. We're, accommodating their calls, things like this. And we hear a lot. Like when I went into this before, I was hearing a lot of, like the education system will produce really like intelligent people that do not know how to do their job. And it could take 9 months before somebody was really ready to do their job. And then I kind of pressed that a little bit on the AI side with some of the technical, partners that we have, like NVIDIA and IBM and Intel. And I learned that like the exact same job title for 2 of those companies, exact same job title, completely different role. And so people were being placed into jobs that just weren't what they thought they were in the back end. So we started working with companies like Julius Education to create like a kind of a skills map that instead of looking at titles of jobs, right? It takes the skills that somebody has, the skills required to do a job, and then matches them that way. So you kind of have to get really creative right now. But once we started to implement changes that industry was telling us they need, but they could see that we were doing it differently, that changed the tide a little bit. Because I think very often we listen to industry, but you're not really seeing a change in the delivery of the product after the fact. And you kind of have to do that. I think you have to prove before, like they come back with anything more. But once you do, it's, that commitment's there. And then, you couldn't have the program without it, right? And I had like, so the person that actually invented the battery that powered the Super Bowl a couple years ago, he's an industry guy. When we decided to launch, we were the first in the nation to have cluster approval for battery innovation in one of these trades programs, high school level. He came back and taught all the teachers for me, every one of them, did it for like nothing. It was 12 weeks of his time, but now we had, the ability to launch this for real. And if we didn't have that genuine connection with industry, I would never, never have been able to accomplish that. Snap-on tools is great. And then share with your friends and partners and people like this, companies that will show up at the table and who at those companies is the right connection, because we all have connections and they're probably all different. Micron, literally, there's probably 150 names that are flown around, but there's like 1 or 2 people that can make those decisions. So, if you know that, share it with the right people, help make those introductions and believe in the programs you're putting forward, and, and then make that part of your job. Like that becomes part of my, internal like working group that I have, and I make myself part of theirs. If you are having no luck with any industry, I mean, if you're doing something in healthcare, the hospital systems are usually pretty easy to get, to work with right away. They always need to have additional, help and support on the nursing side, certified nursing care, any kind of thing like that. They're usually very, eager to be at the door. Snap-on Tools and Caterpillar and companies like that, they all have internal programs that are really strong. They're required to have these types of interactions, so they will show up. And then, same for like, your Microns and things like that, but there it is a matter of the right person, or you might not ever hear from them again. So, it would be interesting just to have a kind of a working session on companies and who to contact for what and who does what, just to better, so people can kind of better understand that whole framework and layout, and where it makes sense to put your effort to ask and where it doesn't, because it's probably not going to, produce what it is that you're hoping it's going to produce on the back end too.
Yeah, that's a great idea to have that kind of primer on how to approach or what to look to begin approaching. I think I could benefit from that specifically. So, any other questions that the audience has, that the Surge team has for Stacey before we move on to the closing? I can't believe it's already been most our time is almost up. It's pretty fast. I see Mike, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to come on. I appreciate you sharing your background and how you're working with some of these different groups, and was curious. So I'm not sure if I had shared. We are getting ready to launch what we're calling Innovate USA, a way to be able to have a summit that gathers folks across the Midwest to come together, innovators from labs, classrooms, boardrooms, and just start to gather. We're doing a hackathon model. So you mentioned the partnerships with NVIDIA, and was curious how you would potentially start engaging the broader network. So knowing the impact that Surge is having, we know we can do it locally within our region. We know all the right people. How do we create that critical mass, both bringing in the right hyperscalers so that we can launch a great hackathon, but then a broader ecosystem to make everybody feel included and give this as a destination summit feel?
And I'm sorry, were you asking, I think that, is that for me and for Surge or just for Surge? I didn't want to jump in. If you were asking kind of on the Surge side first.
I Yeah, if I could, opinions from both would be greatly appreciated. And I
Yeah.
apologize, I just realized I'm looking at a different screen than my camera, so it looks like I'm staring off somewhere else.
That's okay. There's no problem with that. I could barely see anything with these glasses on. I'm realizing I wore the wrong glasses and I can't see close up with these. But so everybody looks perfect right now. One thing I would say with that, just that popped in my head, I don't know if you're working with AWS at all, so Amazon Web Services, but they do a lot. They've got a really cool program that's called, it's like eight, I'll send it to you actually, because I think your contact information will be in here. They
I
do
was late joining this call because I was on the phone with them.
Okay, perfect. I was going to say, because they usually have a pretty good network that they could pull in to the event too. I know they had a lot of change turnover in leadership in this program with their 8,000, their last layoff of 8,000 people. But one of the people that used to run this, and he was fantastic, his name is Craig. He's a consultant now. So he's still actually available too. If you didn't get, I don't know if you were talking to Tekla or who at AWS, but that is one avenue that, if they are engaged with the right people, they could bring in a pretty diverse community into participation, and they'll come right on site and help run that. So like, I think it's AWS, Cisco, and Intel who did one of ours before, and they did work together on it. So it was pretty cool. And then I'm going to pass this over to Serge first, and then I might come back with a couple other ideas.
Sure. So I actually am not the best suited to answer that. So if someone from the search team has an answer, or we might have to huddle and get back to you, Mike. But yeah.
No problem. I chatted with the Surge team before and just shared this opportunity. So
Right.
you guys have been amazing. I had a chance to speak with Dedrick, who I had worked with at WashU years ago, and
Oh
he's
yeah.
been a great champion for Surge as well. So I just love what you're doing.
Mike, so Wisconsin's involved in this with what you want to do?
So we do want to do across the Midwest, the heartland. So I do have a contact at Wisconsin-Madison, but if there's anybody that you think that I should be speaking with,
Yeah.
please, the more connections, the better, warm leads, and just want this to really be very inclusive. So both, demographic and geographic.
I think so Sam Rickers is the deputy secretary for the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, and they fund like all of the statewide grants and things like that there. But he in particular, he used to run, he was at a nonprofit that did something pretty similar, but he's pretty dynamic. He's definitely a straight shooter. I would reach out to him. And there's a great kind of startup ecosystem in the Midwest too. So you have Generator. Joe, who's a co-founder of Generator, was on the WDC board. I'm not sure if he still is, but Generator, if you look them up, they invest all over the place. And if you want to do something sort of in that innovation space, they might be great also to pull in for something like that. So I can't remember I'll get back to it how to spell Joe's last name, but I'm just putting these in the notes as in the comments as a note. So I'm happy to follow up with you. I can make introductions for you too. And I'm sure I could think of others. I work really closely with Argonne National Lab. I do a lot with them. So, they're right outside Chicago. So a lot of the work that we do is Midwest focused. So anything in like battery, energy storage, material, minerals, Argonne's an exceptional partner to bring in for that. Definitely in the innovation space. Kristen Wall has been running their programs for decades, and she's one of the most dynamic, amazing human beings I've ever had the pleasure to work with. So, if I could learn a little bit more about what you want to do, I'm happy to share names.
Wonderful. I am so thankful for that. I will share that the University of Missouri system, I'm dropping in my email now so we can stay in touch, just received an NSF Engines grant
I
for
know.
critical minerals. So I think that alignment with looking at batteries and what Argonne National Lab's doing, I think could be a great fit. So any connections you're willing to share would be really appreciated. I'll also drop in our website if anybody's interested to just see what we're building here and explore how we can partner.
That's awesome. And a good friend of mine just went to Missouri from Madison. I know he's doing some stuff in geothermal over there. His name is Jim Tingham. Great guy. Very neat. So if you guys are in the same neighborhood, I'm going to go and visit him one of these days. So it'd be great to catch up. And I'm happy, like I said, to help any way I can. So it was great to meet you.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. Thank you for your presentation.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mike, for sharing your website and asking the great question. I think this is exactly what Surge is about, connecting experts and other experts in a way that it's a way we all benefit. And yeah, thanks, Stacey, for sharing your network and your expertise.
Lizette, I can also like jump in for
Yeah.
a second. And Mike, yeah, thank you so much for being in touch. We have been like tracking you as one of our, potential regions that's, getting everybody together. So I'm just gonna quickly announce the next steps. We have gone through everyone who has completed their Form 2. All this data is collected. So we are organizing interviews, with each and every one of these people who have passed that threshold. So you will hear from us soon. Thank you for your patience. And then, we want to recognize what are your needs and, how we can like help you. And I'm so happy that this organically happened. Obviously, like a lot of our board members can give you the resources you need and connect you to the people that you need. And, we can provide those steps for you as well.
I really appreciate that. I've been so impressed with this initiative and just happy to support any way I can. And I know Natalie Self with Cortex here in St. Louis has a presentation coming up, and I chatted with her last week and was just talking about Surge and ways that we can all partner. So this is having the desired effect, at least locally here.
Awesome.
That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah, very wonderful. It's exciting to see like the pudding is coming along, something along those lines. But we are almost at time. I do want to end in a kind of energizing activity with Stacey. We call it a lightning round. And Stacey, what we're going to ask is advice from you, but it has to be succinct. So
Okay.
I will give you a short prompt and you complete the sentence.
You got
And
it.
this is advice for regional leaders. So something regional leaders should stop,
Building in silos.
start,
Getting to know your partner's assets.
double down on,
Transparency and commitment to mission completion.
one workforce metric regions should pay more attention to,
Retention.
one partner every regional talent strategy needs at the table is
Industry.
One thing
Industry, an active employer in your region.
one thing universities could do differently to support regional economic development is
To ensure policy and practice allows for intermediary activity.
if a region wants to compete for its next major federal investment, it should start blank today.
Learning today, reaching out to the sponsor, reaching out to your partners, reaching out to people at Surge, reaching out to people that have been funded by these programs, and learning all about it before you start to write.
One action every participant should take in the next 90 days is
Identify who your core, I'm going to say industry partner, but really employing partner is. Identify who that is, and really do a self-determination on if that partnership is strong enough for you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was great. You're a great participant of our little lightning round game.
Thank you. It was
And
fun. You put me on my
very,
toes. I had to think.
thank you. And now we are almost at the top of the hour. So thank you everyone for joining. Before you go, I do want to once ask you to please rate this webinar, the quality of the content and the conversation. A very simple, frowny face, neutral face, or smiley face. So please hit one of those. I won't, it is anonymous, so you can go for your honest, transparent answer. We value that fully. And thank you so much. I think everyone's answered. And it looks like it's mostly smiley, so that's great. Let me see if I can end it. Share for full transparency. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for being here, and we hope to see you at the next search event in 2 weeks. We will send a reminder to register for that. And have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you,
Thanks
Stacey.
everybody so much. Have a great day. Bye.